Good morning, I'm Jessica Lovell. Today we bring you an encore presentation of one of our very favorite programs. We'll still be live with you this summer, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then come September, we'll be back with our regularly scheduled programming. Until then, enjoy this encore presentation and make it a great day. Coming up today, we meet the robot farmer, his journey from losing a hand to finding a bionic arm, plus the surgical techniques that make it all work. Good morning, I'm Jessica Lovell, and welcome to the Morning Medical Update. After Conor Cox lost his hand in a farming accident, he admits it took a toll on his mental health, but he certainly has kept a sense of humor.
First full day with the new arm, and obviously becoming a robot farmer, you've got to get back to the Midwest basics, which is the one finger wave.
And these days, Conor doubles as a TikToker. His account, Robot Farmer, spreads awareness about his bionic hand, life in agriculture, and mental health, plus, again, a lot of humor mixed in there with it. Today, we're learning about that prosthetic hand and the attempt to save his original hand. Conor joins us remotely this morning. He is up in Northwest Kansas. That's in Norton County, about halfway to Denver from here in Kansas City. Conor, good morning. How are you?
I'm great. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Well, we've been looking forward to it, and we're excited to hear more about this. And we're joined here next to me with Dr. Charles Christopher Jaley, a plastic surgeon with special training in hand surgery and microsurgery. He works here at the University of Kansas Health System, and we always like to kind of reunite our doctors with our patients. What's it like? I know you've said it's been a couple months since you've seen Conor.
It's been a little while, so it's really nice to see you, Conor. Thanks for having me.
You bet, you bet. So we're going to talk with you both just a little bit, and we're going to talk about how you relocated some of Conor's muscles to make his bionic hand easier to use when he eventually got one. But let's start with Conor. Take us back to December 2022. Conor, how did you injure your hand?
So it started out like any other day on the farm. We were doing some farm chores, and then we came back to clean off some equipment. And the equipment got turned on while my hand was in a place that it shouldn't have been. And so from there, in a split second, my hand was gone. And like so many things on the farm, that can happen very quickly.
What was it like in that moment? Again, I'm trying to think of you on the farm going through this. I mean, I'm sure you know exactly what you're doing, but these kind of accidents can happen, I would imagine, to anyone. What were you thinking in that moment?
In that moment, my first thought was we've got to get to the hospital. There's no other way around it. I'm going to need something. So I'm taking off across the yard. My mind is racing 1,000 miles an hour. And, it's not necessarily panic. It's that adrenaline kicks in, and you're just doing the basic reactions, which is try and save yourself at that point.
And you mentioned getting help quickly, and you're in one of the most rural parts of the state of Kansas. How did you end up here at the University of Kansas Health System?
So we drove to our local hospital, and from there we were flown out to Kansas City, which is a much quicker drive than going 5 hours. Luckily, we found a team that was able to fly us. Otherwise, it would have been that they were able to fly us halfway to Manhattan, and from there we would have had to take in an ambulance. But luckily, we were able to fly the whole way.
And I'm sure a lot of details happened between the moment this accident happened until when you finally got to meet Dr. Jaley. But what was that first meeting like?
From the start, I can't say enough good things about Dr. Jaley. Nice to know that he's here, so that way I can kind of pump up his self-confidence. But from the start, he was saying that, he's going to do for me what he would do for his family if they were in the same circumstance. So from the start, I had no doubt that Dr. Jaley was going to put in his full effort, his full time, and to make sure that no matter what, I was getting the best treatment possible.
And Dr. Jaley, I think it's fair to say this is not something you see every day, but it's certainly what you trained for, right?
Yeah.
What was it like when you first saw Conor?
So I met Conor actually when he was already asleep. He had been brought in by an aircraft, and I met his family kind of around the same time, and just like Conor had said, just imagining if he was my brother or if it was my hand, what would I want to have to be done. Fortunately, accidents don't happen like this every single day, but they happen frequently enough that You have to be prepared for them, and there's not a textbook answer. And if somebody wants to go to, every length possible to try to salvage a limb, I'm here for it.
You're here to do it.
Yeah.
So at first you reattached Conor's hand, and Conor shared a photo of his recovery from that first surgery, but ultimately the hand needed to be amputated. What happened during that first attempt to salvage his hand?
Yeah, so anytime you put another part of a body that has been amputated, you're relying on the new blood supply that's been brought back to it to allow the blood flow to the area and heal. Anytime there's we call it kind of a large zone of injury or significant amount of damage to that tissue, your body releases chemicals, and I think there was enough inflammation that it just wasn't going to really take, so to speak.
Well, talk to us about the window of time that you're working within. You have this patient, you know what you've got to try to do. What kind of decisions are you needing to make, and what's that like? Take us inside.
That's a good question. There are kind of multiple zones of critical timing. So if a part is to be amputated, be it a finger, a hand, arm, you have about 6 hours if that hand or larger pieces is just brought in what we call warm. If it's treated properly, which Conor's was, wrapping it in some saline and gauze and putting it on ice, that extends the timeline considerably. It can be up 12 hours or so. These aren't absolutes and doesn't preclude you from trying something, but that's the kind of most acute and earliest window. After that, usually if something has been reattached and it's survived for a week or so, that usually means it's going to be pretty good. And that was unfortunately kind of the critical time in Conor's case where things started not looking quite as well.
Conor, I have to ask, where was the hand? You lose a hand. Was it brought in separately? I mean, how did that get transported?
So that actually is a little more interesting. So my wife and I took off for the hospital. My dad was still there on the farm, and so he was actually the one who brought the hand in, I think, an hour later. So the hand had run through the machine, which is why in the picture it looks a little rough, because it had ran through almost 40 feet at least of an auger system, which most people won't know what that's like, but it's pretty much a giant corkscrew. And so it had been run through a tumbler already by that point. And so my dad ended up bringing it in a little later.
And I think we have some photos that we're going to show throughout this conversation of just what your hand looked like so people can get an idea. But it was, and you had said that what you saw when you saw Conor, it was a pretty rough deal. You ultimately realized the hand is not going to take after it attaches. Mm-hmm. Explain that.
So, we use blood flow as a surrogate for the health of any sort of part that's reattached. In Conor's case, just like you'd see in a hospital patient who was in the hospital for any other reason, one of those pulse ox, those little finger lights that measures how much oxygen somebody has in their blood, was attached to his reattached hand. That started showing a decrease in oxygen on the morning or kind of the late morning of the day that it looked like the hand was, we kind of say, going down or not looking so healthy. And that's when we knew it's a good idea, go back to the operating room, see what's going on, see if there's anything that's still salvageable.
And Conor, you told us that you could feel that your hand wasn't as warm as what you knew it should be, right?
So from the start, Dr. Jaley was trying to get me to kind of realize that the hand was there again. And so I was kind of touching it and feeling it along the way, to kind of get reacclimated to knowing it's there after a traumatic event. And so the first couple of days, I felt that it was very warm, like it felt like a normal hand, minus the injuries. But that one morning, it had already felt cooler and more cold to the touch.
And just to explain your dedication to your patients and this case, you actually left your grandmother's funeral, I understand?
Yeah, she was, we were laying to rest in Emporia, Kansas, and we came back for helping Conor, yeah.
Sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing that. But why was it so important for you to get back to doing what you do?
I think Conor kind of said it best at the beginning. I genuinely feel that my patients are family in that sense, and I would really hope that somebody, if it were me or one of my kids or my wife or something was in the hospital, somebody would have that same approach to things. So
somebody that has the expertise that you have. So, and I want to talk with you about that, because one of the fascinating parts about this case is when you amputated Conor's hand, you moved around some muscles and some nerves of his remaining limb. What was the purpose of that?
Yeah, so just because somebody's hand didn't quite make, or if it's a digit or an amputated part, either can't be reattached or maybe is better off not attached, doesn't mean you can't do other things to set somebody up for success. Pretty much anybody who has an amputation at the level of the hand is going to have some level of phantom limb pain. We don't have a lot of additional procedures, additional things that we can address it, especially later. So if you can do something to rewire those nerves or give those nerves something to do, it can decrease the amount of phantom limb pain that you have, even if you still have some. Additionally, if you give your body some muscles that those nerves can fire, those signals can be picked up by an advanced prosthetic as well. Even if you don't use one, you get the benefit of doing this from a phantom limb standpoint, but in someone who's young, otherwise healthy, there's no reason not to set somebody up for, what would be essentially the Cadillac of a prosthetic arm.
Well, I was telling you, this is really good planning on your part. I was just kind of breaking it down. This has a very fancy name that you explained, but really this was you thinking ahead of technology that would ultimately put Conor in the best spot possible.
Yeah, and so really most of our efforts right now in our current day is to pick up signals that a muscle is firing underneath the skin. We don't have any interface right now that can pick up a signal from the nerve directly. And so anything we can do to amplify that signal, bring those muscles closer to the surface, have them in separate areas, have multiple targets, that will increase the degrees of freedom or the intricacy of the myoelectric prosthesis and hopefully make it feel as natural as possible.
This would have happened, let's say 30, 40 years ago. What would the options have been?
30 or 40 years ago, it'd be, focused on making sure there was a good soft tissue envelope, which of course we still do anyway, so that it can interface well with the prosthetic, but it would be more likely to be a body powered or kind of a dynamic hook or some type of prosthesis like that.
Fair to say we've come a long way. Yeah. Conor, when you show off your hand, do you wear it all the time? Do you have it on now?
I don't have it on right now because right after this I'm going back to work, but it really depends on the job around the farm. If I'm doing something a little more dusty or a little more dirty, I don't want to try and gum up those parts, and so I won't wear it. Whereas something, if I'm driving or doing something where I need two hands because I'm putting parts together, then I'll put it on.
So how have you adjusted? I mean, I can't think of anything that would, you've got a very laborious job you have, not to mention the fact that you have two small children that you're carrying around. So being a farmer and being a parent, you're using your limbs. How have you adjusted?
The adjustment, being a parent, it was, I was relearning how to be a dad because, I had to be extra cautious not having that left hand when I was doing simple tasks as a dad. Whereas on the farm, I work with my wife 24/7. And so she was always there where, if I needed that quote unquote extra hand, she was there to help me out. I worked closely with my dad as well. So I was never far away from someone who, if I was struggling, they were able to step in and take over.
Yeah, you've called your wife a good partner. That's when you marry well, right?
Oh, I married out of my, I'll say that from now until the day I die, that, I wouldn't have been nearly the person I am going through this without her.
And of course, through all of this, you've kept this awesome sense of humor. I want to listen to another one of your videos.
It's been a year since the accident, and the question I get asked most on TikTok is, Conor, how did you get so attractive? Well, that's easy. I had two options. I could either be attractive or I could count to 10 on all my fingers. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pretty easy to see which option I chose.
Well, and Conor, it's easy to see your sense of humor now, but right after this surgery, it's taken a while because understandably you were in a pretty bad place mentally, and that's something you've been really open talking about on TikTok. So I want to talk with you more about that and listen to one of your videos here first.
So I like making the videos, I like showing off the hand. It's cool, but I don't necessarily always love the situation I'm in. I struggle with body image, especially right after the accident. I just wanted to hide in a hole and never come out. But I've slowly learned to love myself, and I've loved going on this journey of getting to share my story and meet new people and talk to new people. And I'll calibrate the hand real quick to show how it moves. But I just want y'all to know it's not always easy, no matter what struggle you're going through, but you gotta learn to love yourself.
Conor, from the time of the accident till what we just heard there, how long did that take before you really started feeling more comfortable?
So I think that was about 8 months is when I made that video. 8 to 10 months post accident is when I made that one. And it still rings true to this day that I'm not always comfortable in my body, but when I show the humorous side of my situation, I also feel like I need to show the more serious, so that way people who are watching, they understand that I can make light of this situation, but my life still isn't perfect. Like, I haven't fully adjusted to this yet.
Well, and originally you said that you had tried a hook and claw prosthesis, something that maybe many of us are used to seeing with somebody who's lost a limb. You said you didn't really like that. Eventually, you find Open Bionics. That's the company that makes the current prosthesis that you've been showing us. How did you find them?
So my wife was actually researching grants for farmers who have lost a hand to find an electric prosthesis. And Open Bionics just happened to be the first ad that popped up on our search bar. And so from there, it was about 48 hours before we had an appointment set with them to go out to Denver and meet and start casting and making sure all the nerves were in the right spot to, go from there and get my electric hand. Luckily, that was a quick time frame, and I can't believe how blessed we were to have stumbled upon them. And they're kind of like Dr. Jaley. I mean, they're people who they're wanting the best for their patients, and they're going to make that happen.
So tell us how it works. It sends messages to your muscles. Is there a chip in there? Explain to us.
So it has 2 sensors in it. One sensor which reads if you were typically bending your wrist backwards, that would be opening the hand. And the other sensor reads underneath your arm, and if you were to bend your wrist forward, it picks that up as closing the hand. And the hand has preset grips, and it has 6 different preset grips that I can cycle through, such as, pinching your finger, or, a 2-fingered pinch, or just your typical open and close.
So Dr. Jaley, just to clarify, the muscles in Conor's arm are sending electric signals directly to the bionic hand. Is that what you had planned?
That's correct. And so there are advances that are being made at all times to pick up these signals. And what you have to do is amplify them to the degree possible. And as time goes on, and one thing that I've looked into Open Bionics, which is nice, they can increase the number of electrodes as well. So right now Conor has 2. From a physiologic standpoint, he's got 2 other targets, like at the wrist level, that could eventually be incorporated into that as the technology advances.
So go back to that moment when you first saw Conor on the table when you walked in, to now seeing him today, TikToking, back to work. He has a new child. What's that like for you as a doctor? It's honestly the most rewarding part of this is, seeing actual people who go on and will still live their life and do things that they need to do. I really like extremity surgery because it's very functional based. A lot of people think about plastic surgery and they think of all the cosmetic aspects of it, but really aiming at allowing people to get back to work, get back to their life, do activities of daily living. It's going to be a new normal. It's impossible to get somebody like snap your fingers and have them go back to how things were before. But when you get the right kind of combination of a patient who is motivated, who has like a very strong support network, who's willing to kind of go through some intense therapy and have on the other side of it moments where they're enjoying their life and then even sharing it with other people. I find that just incredibly rewarding. Conor's kind of the perfect patient.
Yeah.
Living his life and trying to get back to that new normal. We know that function is one thing, Conor, but there's also the aesthetics of a new arm. You showed us how you can actually swap out arm covers. Where do those come from?
So I 3D print those here at home, and I have to admit, 3D printing was new to me. So I'm not the best at it. So a lot of those covers break pretty quickly because, like I said, it's 3D printing isn't the easiest thing, but Open Bionics also pre-makes their own. And so they make a lot of different colors, textures, designs on their own. Mine, again, are breaking pretty well after the first use, but people get a laugh out of them.
They're cool. That Chiefs one's pretty cool. Spot on. That came just in time. So, Conor, you had mentioned a lot, a little bit earlier about your wife and just the support, but you're raising children and, again, doing this job that takes so much from your body. So just share with us a little bit more about how important it is to have people supporting you, because there's somebody out there right now who's listening to this or may go through what you're going through, and maybe a family member listening. How important is it to have everybody pitch in?
It's vital to recovery, not only for me, but also for my wife, who was there that day, who spent 10 days on a hospital bed in her third trimester. Husbands can complain about sleeping on an uncomfortable bed while their wife is in delivery, but she did it for 10 days in her third trimester. So I'm not ever going to complain about that.
Yeah.
But it's what got me to where I am today. And I think therapy was also a big part of that. And I'm glad we're in an era now where therapy is seen as a good thing and not necessarily a negative thing. Or, 20 years ago, people thought, if I go to therapy, I'm crazy. Whereas in today's day and age, it's encouraged. And I think that, people need to realize therapy is there to help.
Well, and I want to stay on that point, because when you think of a farmer, you think of kind of these tough guys out on the farm all day long, doing just what they do, pushing through. Did you ever think that you'd be an advocate for mental health?
No, I had no idea that I'd be pushing for this, 3 years ago when I was farming. But, since then, all the guys who I've talked to, it made me realize more and more how not only mental health on the farm is so necessary, but just everyday life. People in these times are going through so many struggles, and they're trying to hide them because they're seeing all this glamorous life on TikTok or on social media, and people aren't showing their true side. They're not really showing their struggles. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew, it's okay to reach out, whether it's to me or to professional help. Find someone who will listen, to make sure you don't feel that you're alone.
Great point, and thank you for sharing that. Also, you've become an even bigger advocate for farm safety to make sure that other people don't end up in your position. What else are you sharing?
So on the farm, we were always big into farm safety, and it's the one time that we weren't as, I personally wasn't as focused on it. I was in a rush that morning, and it ended me up here. And so it's so important to, even if you're in a rush, you've got to take the time to make sure that you're safe and that you're following all the general steps that you would anytime.
And Brenda, Jean, and Georgianne, among others. Conor just mentioning what a beautiful, beautiful family you have from God's country. So just wanted to pass that along to you. Marcia has a question and just a comment. Conor seems so grounded, and I think we're all catching on to that. Do you have any good advice for people coping with any type of major life-changing experience?
So like I said earlier, therapy is such a vital importance, but also surrounding yourself in a community that's willing to support you and lift you up in times like this, because, you're not only relying on your own strength, you're relying on everyone's around you. And you're not only healing, but also everyone else who went with you through it.
Conor, do you feel phantom pain in your arm?
So I do, and the best way I can describe it as if you were to stick your hand in a bucket of cold water right before it goes numb, that kind of tingle, that's kind of what I live with. But through the Facebook groups and the support groups that I've seen, mine is very minor compared to some people's. And so I'll take what I have.
I saw you nodding your head. That's about what you hear from people regarding phantom pain. That's common.
It's very common. Almost everybody who, has an amputation at the level of the wrist is going to have some level of phantom pain, and we try to aim to decrease that to a point that it's not interfering with normal activities of daily living. That's a win. That's a win. At least with our current technology.
Last question, and really important, is regarding insurance. Did insurance pay for it, or how much out of pocket did you have to pay, Conor?
So with my body-powered prosthetic, insurance covered most of that one, but to go to a myoelectric prosthesis, they wouldn't cover it because it was considered a luxury item. And so my options were to switch insurance, which now that I didn't have a hand, I had a pre-existing condition, or I could go ahead and pay out of pocket. So another part of why we went to Open Bionics is because they were 10 times cheaper than what the leading competition was, because they're not in it to make necessarily a giant profit. They're in it to help people and to get people like me back in an electric arm and feeling back to their normal self.
Is a functioning hand a luxury in your eyes?
Yeah, this is something I feel very strongly about, and insurance companies and how they see upper extremity prosthesis versus lower extremity prostheses. There's huge differences, and I advocate very strongly on all my patients' behalfs, and unfortunately stories like Conor's are the norm rather than an exception.
But hopefully this helps move the needle,
Yeah.
and we're making some type of progress.
Yeah, and charismatic companies like Open Bionics do move the goalposts in that way. They are disruptors in the industry, and if you can lower the barrier to entry, that's only going to help patients.
And it helps when Conor's disrupting on TikTok like he is,
Exactly.
right? Getting
Yeah.
the word out. And I want to get to our takeaways today. Dr. Jaley, what do you want people to really take away from our conversation?
That limb salvage can look a lot of different ways, and it's always targeted functionally. So it might be different for each person, and everybody's journey is a little bit different. Sometimes reattachment of a part might be possible, but even if it's not, there are other things that can be done to set people up for success and do the things that they want to do afterwards.
Thanks for the great work you're doing and joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Conor, again, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and with the world as you go out there on TikTok. What's the big takeaway from your story?
Again, I'll just keep on preaching mental health. It's so important in times like this. And when a country or when a world is so divided, we've got to stand together, and especially people who are struggling, you've got to find and support other people in your lifestyle, whether it be another farmer or just your next door neighbor.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast.